organization, secretive, which is only open to Jewish men who are Zionist. And so the New York Times is really like B'nai B'rith Times. And on September 11, 2004, 3 years after 9/11, they had this most bizarre lead editorial, "The Public Knowledge of 9/11." And the first sentence is the most peculiar sentence I've ever seen. It says, "In the 3 years since 9/11, we've begun to understand that it's possible to know what happened without knowing what happened." And they expect the New York Times audience, the New York Times readers to go away, okay, we know what happened, but we don't know what happened. We'll accept that. And it says at the end, "Some of what we need to know publicly has been provided by the report of the 9/11 Commission. Other answers are lacking." Like what happened to this building. This is Building 7, 47-story building, owned by Larry Silverstein, and at 5:23 in the afternoon, this building simply fell down into its footprint with no explanation. There were some small office fires in this building, that's true. It had some slight damage from falling debris, that's true. But there were explosions that went off in this building before either tower fell. And there were dead bodies in this building, and this building also housed the Office of Emergency Management for New York City on the 23rd floor. They had a hardened bunker that was resistant to even a nuclear blast. And most likely, the people who pulled the towers 1 and 2 were on that 23rd floor. Then they had to destroy the evidence. But in any case, this was the third tower that fell that day. Larry Silverstein's third candidate, a trifecta, a perfect trifecta for him. And it's interesting, I talked to the insurance company that insured this building, and they paid for this building without knowing what happened to it. I said, "Why did you do that?" They didn't give me a good answer. There's Teachers Insurance in Kansas. Now, this is the World Trade Center Memorial, and lo and behold, this was also built for us by an Israeli. This is the architect. His name is Michael Arad. And he's no small player. His daddy was the Israeli ambassador in the United States. And of all the people that submitted, designs, they chose his design. And so the Israelis also have created then for us the legacy, the memorial, the museum. The carved in stone aspect of 9/11 was designed for us by this young Israeli fella. So what I want to point out here is that at every crucial point in this 9/11 saga, you find an Israeli or a person who's serving the Israelis making the key decision that will become history. Now, the American people doubt the 9/11 narrative. They doubt it very much. And this is the most generous most generous poll, which finds that 40% of the people believe the official account. But that means that 60% do not believe it. Now, the last aspect of the cover-up is the litigation. You have to cover up you have to control the legal process, the court trials that happen as a result. Now, there were, of course, 3,000 wrongful death cases on 9/11. The first 2,900 were settled out of court when the people simply took the money that was given to them by U.S. compensation. And when they signed the dotted line and took the check, they signed away their rights to have any litigation further. But there were 96 families who held out for a process. They wanted to find out in a court of law who was responsible for the loss of their loved one. And they had every right to do so. And of those 96 people, they were all settled out of court. And this was a process that was headed by this judge, Alvin K. Hellerstein, a federal judge, U.S. federal judge in Manhattan. And I discovered a really serious conflict of interest here, because the key defendant in the tort litigation was an Israeli Mossad company called ICTS, based in Holland. And it's called International Consultants on Targeted Security. And that company, that Israeli security company, owned a little company called Huntley USA, which was the company that screened the passengers on 9/11 at Logan Airport, at Newark Airport. So if these 19 Arabs got on the plane with box cutters and all that kind of stuff, they had to go through Israeli security. So the Israelis would have had to explain how these guys got on the plane, show the videos of them getting on the plane, But the problem was that the judge's son works for that company in Israel. But it didn't stop this. And what the judge did, what Judge Hellerstein then did, is that he oversaw the process where one by one, each one of those 96 families was settled out of court until there were none left standing. So that means that there will never be a trial for 9/11 in this country, because everybody that had standing has taken the money and gone home. And this is all done through these characters here. This is Kenneth Feinberg, the special master. He's the one who doled out the government money for the first 2,900 families. And then the 96 families that were left over were dealt with by Sheila Birnbaum. And Sheila Birnbaum settled them each one out of court. And what's interesting in this is when the families sign the dotted line, there's a gag order in there that they cannot talk about anything about their settlement. So they take the money and then are sworn to silence. And these two people, as are the judges, they're all closely tied to the state of Israel. And here's another guy, Michael Mukasey, another judge. He goes to the same congregation as Judge Hellerstein. And this man is important because he oversaw the 1993 bombing in the World Trade Center when there was a truck bomb. The FBI was involved in putting a truck bomb in the building. And that case was prosecuted by Michael Chertoff. So Michael Chertoff was the prosecutor from New Jersey in that trial. And this judge oversaw it. And what they basically did is the FBI had paid $1 million to an Egyptian colonel, and that Egyptian colonel was the informant, Salam. And he had gotten into his orbit some Egyptian fellas, and it basically entrapped them into this plot. They didn't do anything, but they were trapped in the plot. And so that when the crime happened and the process happened, they were found guilty. You have to understand that the FBI lately, in the last 20 years, is no longer a Federal Bureau of Investigation. It's a Federal Bureau of Instigation, in that it instigates and entraps people in culpable positions where they can be held responsible for crimes they didn't do. And it's happened so many times in the last 10 years, it's unbelievable. So the question is, what are they covering up? Well, the government and controlled media are suppressing 9/11 evidence that would expose the official myth as a pack of lies. And they do this in order to protect the real culprits from being identified. Because if you understood what really happened on 9/11, you would understand that there's no way that Osama bin Laden and a bunch of Arabs did this, that this was in fact a very sophisticated operation. And after 9/11, I went to Germany because I was writing about 9/11 from my home in Chicago, pointing out all the holes in the story. And I felt, how safe can I be doing this when the government is going to war based on these lies? And if I'm exposing these lies, I said, that's not very safe. So I decided to relocate to Germany. And in Germany, I was lucky to meet, in the very first week, 3 former heads of German intelligence who spoke to me. The first one said that the 9/11 to him looked like a Hollywood production. That's very true. Then I spoke to this man, Wertebach, and he said that the deathly precision and magnitude of planning behind the 9/11 attacks would have needed years of planning. Such a sophisticated operation would require the fixed frame of a state intelligence organization. So, what state would he be referring to? What state are we talking about? Here's another man I spoke to, Andreas von Bülow, and he told me on 9/11, he said that right at the outset when I asked him, who do you think's behind it, without flinching, he said, looks like it was a Mossad operation. And I printed that. It was written, I reported that, and it was printed in my newspaper in Washington, D.C. And he was a little bit flabbergasted. I spoke to him later that my magazine, my newspaper, had printed that. Because he said, he has told that to every German journalist that spoke to him, but it was never printed in Germany. Because in Germany, it's forbidden to point fingers of any wrongdoing at the state of Israel. So he told me, Andreas von Bülow told me, that you don't get the higher echelons. That is the architectural level. There's the architectural level planners of such a crime, and they design the crime to be blamed on their enemy in order to affect public opinion. So that we, like in this case, the United States, the crime was carried out in New York, the blame was immediately attached to Arabs and Muslims who were based in Afghanistan. So we willingly allowed our nation to go to war in Afghanistan, thinking that we were curing the problem. But we didn't realize we were all being misled down this path to hell. And the second level he calls the managerial level. And these are the people who manage the setting up of the crime and then the covering up of the crime. And the third level, he said, this is the working level. And the working level, he said, is part of the deception. And that would be like the 19 Arab hijackers. That would be like Lee Harvey Oswald. That would be like Sirhan. These are the guys that get caught and blamed. And Andreas von Bülow told me that 95% of the work of intelligence agencies around the world is deception and disinformation, which is widely propagated in the mainstream media, creating an accepted version of events. He said, journalists don't even raise the simplest questions. Those who differ are labeled as crazy. Like here are these 19 hijackers, and 15 of them lived in Florida, in South Florida. What's interesting here is that at least 6 of them had been issued duplicate licenses. And if you read the Florida press how this happened, like one of these characters would go into the DMV and get a license on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, they would call, or somebody in their name would call and say, hello, I'm Muhammad Atta, and I just got my license yesterday, but you know, I moved this morning. I moved to a new house, and I have a new address. So can you send me a new license to my new address? And they did it. And so you had basically 2 people in Hollywood, Florida, or Delray, going around with the same ID, different addresses, but the same name. And then many of these guys had also reported lost passports. So what we're dealing with is a situation where there are duplicate documents in the same name. And duplicate documents like this are used to create false histories. To understand how the Mossad leaves a false trail for a person they want to pin terrorism on, I recommend reading this book, The Little Drummer Girl. It's available in any library. It's written by John le Carré, the famous British spy master. The book came out in 1982 or 83, and he wrote it in 82, and it was written with the help of Israeli military intelligence, former heads of Israeli military intelligence, which he gives credit to in the very first page. And in the book and in the movie, Diane Keaton plays this British actress who is used to befriend a Palestinian person, a leader, a Palestinian leader, who then makes his way across Europe, leaving a trail in his name. And then in the end, there's a bombing in a synagogue in Germany. He's blamed for it, and while he's dead already. And then there's a car blows up on the Autobahn at a Tankstelle in Germany, and he, of course, is in the trunk of the car, blown to pieces. This is exactly what they're doing now. And so if you want to understand how they leave a false trail, like for those 19 Arabs in Florida, I recommend reading this book, because it's a little complicated. It's not something that most Americans think about doing, but what you're doing is you're simply laying a trail of false evidence that will be picked up by investigators later on and used to pin the tail on the wrong guy. Oh, and in the book, the head Mossad guy says to Diane Keaton, the character, he says, terror is theater. Theater's a con trick. Do you know what that means, con trick? You've been deceived. Now, when you go home tomorrow or tonight and you see that another act of terrorism has occurred, keep those words in mind, terror is theater, and ask yourself, does the evidence that we're seeing, does it match the crime? I mean, just for San Bernardino, for example. Some of you watched San Bernardino shooting that happened a couple months ago, and if you saw TV that day, some of the eyewitnesses appeared on national TV, and one woman said there were 3 shooters, and they were all tall white guys. She said they were tall white guys dressed in black who were buffed, and it looked like they really knew what they were doing. And the newscasters on NBC or something said, "What, you mean there were 3? And he says, yes. She said, yes, there were 3 tall white guys dressed in black. Well, who was shot at the end of the day and blamed? A small Pakistani girl, brown-skinned Pakistani girl. And her body and her boyfriend, her husband's body, were found on a street in San Bernardino going back to the scene of the crime, and they were in handcuffs, and their bodies were found on the street dead. And they were blamed. I mean, that operation, the evidence does not fit the crime. And this is what happens all the time. You know, we, however, we're at a distance. We were not in Marseille or Nice. We don't know what happened in Nice. We don't know what happened in Orlando. We have to rely on what we can glean from the media. And sometimes there are bits of information that come through the media that are truthful and indicate that, wait, it doesn't fit. Boston bombing, for example, the marathon bombing, remember that? Well, they blamed the Chernayev brothers, right? Well, one Chernayev brother was dead, and the other brother, the younger brother, Dzhokhar Chernayev, well, we see pictures of him at the Boston Marathon, and he's carrying a clearly white backpack. Nothing dark about it at all. His backpack was silver or white. And yet the FBI director or the FBI investigator said the day after the attack, the day after the bombing, he said very clearly that both devices were packed in black nylon backpacks. Well, why is Dzhokhar Chernayev even a suspect then? Because his backpack was white. You see? So again, they're pinning the tail on the wrong donkey. Now here's 9/11, and I'm just going to address a few of the most outrageous anomalies about 9/11, the things that indicate that we have been given a pack of lies. This is the plane